The Trump nuclear push next on Enviro Close-Up. Welcome to Enviro Close-Up. I am Karl Grossman. The subject, the Trump nuclear push. As this headline reads, Trump administration spearheading international push for nuclear power. And with us is Kevin Kamps. He's the radioactive waste specialist of Beyond Nuclear. It's based in Tacoma Park in Maryland, and you've been fighting against nuclear power, Beyond Nuclear, and Kevin Kamps for years. Now we have an administration under Donald Trump, full throttle push for nuclear power. What is this Trump push about, Kevin?
Yeah, it has been very intense. I mean, as soon as Trump took office in January of 2017, we had a campaign in D.C. amongst a large coalition of groups called the Resist Trump Network. And the whole idea was, in the first 100 days of the Trump administration, as he and his people were deploying their ideas and trying to get stuff locked in, we would respond in kind with daily or even hourly protests all over D.C. You name the federal agency, Capitol Hill, you name it. And the thing is that sprint that began with Trump coming in has not ended. I mean, here we are coming into the end of his first 4 years, and the sprint goes on. The best example, or maybe the worst example, of Trump's pro-nuclear power push, which is also risking very bad nuclear weapons proliferation, is in Saudi Arabia. So Trump and Jared Kushner, who Trump keeps sending over to Saudi Arabia to do his business, they have gone around the will of Congress. There are federal laws on the books where Congress is supposed to have a say when U.S. nuclear power technology is transferred to a foreign government, because there are nuclear weapons proliferation risks. The Trump Department of Energy has simply done an end run around Congress. Congress is supposed to be able to say yes or no to this, and what the Department of Energy has done is just granted exemptions so that that flow of know-how, that flow of technology has already begun. The problem is that neighborhood, the Middle East, is a very dangerous place. Israel already has nuclear weapons. There's so much concern about Iran acquiring nuclear weapons. Here's the Trump administration simply handing over nuclear weapons usable technology to the Saudi regime, which is murderous. Just think of the journalist Jamal Khashoggi, who was murdered with orders from the very top of the Saudi regime. And so, as Congressman Brad Sherman of California put it, how can we trust the Saudi regime with nuclear technology? We can't trust them with a bone saw. And Trump has done all he can to transfer that technology. And one of the companies that would benefit if hired to build atomic reactors in Saudi Arabia is Westinghouse, which is now owned by a Canadian hedge fund, a Canadian holding company, after it went bankrupt a couple years ago, trying to build new reactors in the U.S. It's called Brookfield Asset Management, and the most, sinister part of this whole thing is Brookfield Asset Management is the same company that bailed out Jared Kushner and his family at 666 Fifth Avenue, New York City. They were in debt to the tune of $1 billion. The conflict of interest here is, smells to high heaven, and the stakes couldn't be higher.
You'd think with Chernobyl, that catastrophe, and Fukushima, that disaster, and of course 3 Mile Island, it would be seen that this has been a dead end, that nuclear power is not going anywhere, or shouldn't go anywhere. Nevertheless, this push to resurrect it, to revive it, to push it, and internationally by the United States. Is Trump just totally unknowledgeable about the dangers of nuclear power, or is it, is he in the throes of the nuclear industry, or both?
Both, like you're saying. I mean, it's a regular day in Washington, D.C. at the Department of Energy or the Nuclear Regulatory Commission or the White House, where the nuclear power industry and its lobbyists just run around out of control, or in control, more to the point. Same on Capitol Hill. Trump earlier this year convened a meeting at the White House of nuclear power executives. And it had a lot to do with the Saudi situation. There has been media coverage of this. It's taken a long time to come out. But some of closest consultants to Trump have been involved in this Saudi scheme. They're all looking to make money on it. And so that's the push, is there's so much money to be made. When reactors cost not $1 billion, but more like $10 billion apiece, or in the case of the 2 new reactors in Georgia that are not doing well at all, Vogtle Units 3 and 4, the current price tag down there is $28 billion. That means each one costs $14 billion. So economically, it's not competitive, to put it politely. Somebody's making that money when they have these huge cost overruns, and this will happen if reactors are ever built in Saudi Arabia. There will be huge cost overruns, but the companies involved, the engineering firms, they're making that money. They don't mind that at all, as long as it's somebody else's money. So it's all about the money.
The U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission and the U.S. Department of Energy were basically captured agencies for years. Is it worse now?
It is. I've been doing this work for 27 years now, and I have never seen a Department of Energy or a Nuclear Regulatory Commission as bad, as captured by the industry as they are right now. Just look at the membership of the 5 directors of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the commissioners themselves. Trump's chairman, the 3 Republicans on the Nuclear Regulatory Commission include the chairman, Christine Zwinicki, who's a former Department of Energy official. She lied by omission during her confirmation hearing to get onto the NRC in the first place, not mentioning that she had worked on the Yucca Mountain dump. If Harry Reid had known that as Senate Democratic leader, her confirmation may have been blocked, but she kept it quiet. She got on the commission. Then when Trump came in, he made her chairman. She has never voted against the industry, and she's been on the commission for 11 years. Now she's running the commission. 2 more Trump people, Republicans, include Annie Caputo, who used to be an Exelon nuclear lobbyist before she became a top Capitol Hill staffer for pro-nuclear Republicans. I forgot to mention that about Zwinicki. She was a top Senate staffer for pro-nuclear Republicans. So now Annie Caputo, former nuclear lobbyist, then top Capitol Hill staffer for pro-nuclear Republicans, now an NRC commissioner. She was getting stuff done on the legislative side. Now she's in the executive branch, weakening regulations. And the 3rd Trump Republican on the NRC Commission is David Wright from South Carolina. He was president of the Public Service Commission down there, who approved every request for money to build the 2 proposed new reactors at Summer Nuclear Power Plant. Long story short, a $9 billion fiasco that the ratepayers of South Carolina will be paying for a long time to come. It's 20% of their electric bills. They will never get a single kilowatt hour of electricity from this plant. It's half built. It'll never be completed. He was the guy who thought it was a great idea. So that's the majority on the NRC. There's one decent NRC commissioner. His name is Jeff Barron, a former Democrat staffer from Capitol Hill. He worked for Henry Waxman years ago on the House side on energy issues, including nuclear. So remember the Markey Waxman bill of 2009 that was about renewables. So he was the chief of staff on the committee at the time. He doesn't vote with us all the time by any means, but he has taken some principled stands. We hope he will continue to do so. Gives you an idea of how things are at the NRC. These are 3-1 votes. If Barron decides to, stick his neck out on something, it'll be a 3-1 vote against us. That comes into play all the time, whether it's nuclear power, reactor issues, or radioactive waste issues. And then on the Department of Energy side of things, you've got Rick Perry, who's kind of a walking joke. I mean, remember when he ran for president, he couldn't remember the name of the Department of Energy. He wanted to eliminate the agency, but he couldn't remember what it was called. And when he got tapped to be Energy Secretary, he thought DOE was in charge of oil and gas. He kind of liked that, being the former Texas governor. He's all about that, right? He didn't even know that the Department of Energy presides over nuclear weapons for the United States, let alone the promotion of nuclear power, which they are now doing with gusto. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission is supposed to be in charge of nuclear safety regulation, but it's pretty hard to tell most days. They're pretty into the promotional aspect themselves, which is a violation of their mandate.
Wow. Now, this piece I just read the headline from begins, "The U.S. is leading a drive to promote nuclear power around the world," showcasing the Trump administration's recognition of nuclear technology as a crucial source of zero-carbon electricity. In other words, the claim would be nuclear power is green, that nuclear power does not produce greenhouse gases and contribute to climate change, though you're not supposed to talk about climate change if you're in the Trump administration. What about this claim? What about this pitch?
Well, nuclear is regarded as a low carbon. It's certainly greater than zero. And as the uranium quality, the concentration of uranium-235, the fissile ingredient, goes down in nature because the quality ore has been exhausted, then that carbon emission required to get the uranium out and to refine it and to process it and to mill it and then to turn it into fuel becomes worse and worse. There are carbon emissions. I mean, the building of the nuclear power plants have a lot of carbon emissions. It's still regarded as low carbon compared to burning coal, for example. The problem is that nuclear has a long list of its own problems. You've got the risk of accidents like Fukushima, Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island. You've got the risk of nuclear weapons proliferation. You've got the radioactive waste problem that has no solution, that will be deadly forever into the future. You've got the astronomical costs. You've got the long time it takes to deploy an atomic reactor. So in terms of a climate solution, it's a non-starter. It costs so much and it takes so long that the climate catastrophe will have come and gone before nuclear even shows up at the starting line. But in addition to that, you've got the insurmountable risks, as Institute for Energy and Environmental Research puts it. Nuclear has a long list of its own problems, and trading off saving the climate versus turning our Earth into a radioactive wasteland, the more reactors that get deployed, the more meltdowns you're going to have, the more uninhabitable dead zones like at Chernobyl and at Fukushima you're going to have going into the future. It's a false choice. Renewables like wind and solar and energy efficiency are the future if we are to have a future. And countries like Germany, the 4th largest economy on the planet, understand this. So they are phasing out nuclear completely by 2022. That is a direct response to not only Chernobyl, and they lived under that cloud, but also Fukushima. Even the Conservative Party of Germany is anti-nuclear, as are the Greens, as are the Social Democrats. They are not replacing that with fossil fuels. They are, on an interim basis, they still have fossil fuels, but by mid-century, we're talking 95% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions in Germany. The way they're doing it is becoming a world leader in renewables, wind and solar, and maximizing efficiency. And the United States, for one, has much greater renewable energy resources than Germany, which is a relatively small country to the north of us. If they can do it, we can do it.
And in terms of carbon emissions, if you look at the so-called nuclear fuel cycle, the mining, milling, fuel enrichment, lots of carbon emissions, lots of greenhouse gases. And of course, a nuclear power plant itself emits radioactive carbon. So as you say, it's not a zero carbon process whatsoever. Now, one of the things the Trump administration is also doing is to try to, have regulations changed. And it's talking about new and improved kinds of nuclear power plants, small modular reactors. The claim is they might be safer and so forth. What do you think about these various excuses in terms of pushing nuclear power? Excuses in regard to, we're going to build safer nuclear plants.
Well, how many times do you have to be burned before you stop believing these lies? I mean, the small modular reactors, for example, are claimed to be new and improved, innovative designs. A lot of these designs are actually decades old, so they're getting designs off the shelf, some of which go back to the 1950s. They didn't work in the last 50-plus years. They're not going to work now. And that's a part of that slowness to deploy. So if we have to wait not years but decades for these Generation 4 advanced nuclear reactors to come online, the climate crisis is over. We've either solved it or we haven't by that time. And the cost of doing this is probably not in the hundreds of billions of dollars, but in the trillions of dollars to deploy these new reactors. Just like we've spent in the last 50 plus years on the nuclear weapons and the nuclear power in this country that have been heavily subsidized. So we just have to stop buying the snake oil that these people are trying to sell us, the national nuclear labs in this country that have tremendous political power, that was born in the Manhattan Project of World War II. They are still huge political players. The nuclear power industry of this country, which is addicted to the money that it's been making all this time on electricity sales, while they have externalized all the costs and risks and liabilities onto the public. So it's a good gig if you can get it. The problem is that the public are shouldering the costs and are suffering the consequences. And you mentioned the carbon releases from the front end of the uranium fuel chain. There are other impacts. A lot of the uranium mining and milling takes place on indigenous lands in North America. So in the United States, for example, Navajo, Dene, and Pueblo Indian lands in the Southwest, in the Four Corners. In the Great Lakes region, for example, Ojibwe lands, northern Canada, native lands. So those radioactive and toxic health impacts are being borne by low-income people of color, indigenous peoples. And that is a truth about nuclear power that extends worldwide. The French, for example, which is often pointed to as a poster child for how great nuclear power is, where do the French get their uranium? They get it from Niger in West Africa. This has been an incredible environmental injustice. The Tuareg nomadic people of the Sahara who've been out there living a nomadic lifestyle with their camels and their goats for over 1,000 years are losing their culture and their way of life and their very lives because Areva of France, the uranium mining company, is using so much water to mine uranium in Niger that the oases that the Tuareg depend upon have dried up. So that is nuclear power in the real world. Those are the impacts that indigenous people worldwide are suffering.
In terms of the Democratic Party of the United States, Democrats in Congress, and well, there's a bunch now of folks running for the Democratic nomination for president. Does that look like, whether it's congressional Democrats or the candidates for the presidency, something that will provide relief?
Well, the Republican Party is pretty clear. Almost to a member is pro-nuclear. Very rarely are there nuclear skeptics on the Republican side. On the Democratic side, it's a more complex field. The recent climate town hall that was hosted by CNN revealed this, that there are some pro-nuclear Democratic presidential candidates. Cory Booker, unfortunately. Andrew Yang is another. They are pro-nuclear. They see nuclear as a climate solution, as a job creator. But there are anti-nuclear Democratic candidates. Bernie Sanders really stands out. And I have to think that the shut-down Vermont Yankee campaign, which was a very sweet grassroots victory, very hard one over 40-plus years. One of the leaders of that effort, Francis Crowe, just passed on at age 100. We shut down Vermont Yankee in 2014. It was a very hard-won victory. And Bernie Sanders took part in that. He was forced to, under public pressure by his constituents in Vermont. If you go further back in his history, he has some less justifiable nuclear positions. So for one example, trying to dump so-called low-level radioactive waste in a Hispanic community in Texas that he was supportive of because it would get the waste out of Vermont. He has come a long way in 20 years on these issues. So I'm very glad to see him saying nuclear has no role in a Green New Deal. It has no role in his climate plan. And in fact, license extensions at old reactors in this country have to be stopped. We have to phase out nuclear power. That's a very wise position by Bernie Sanders because some of these reactors in the United States are now approaching 50 years in age. The good news is, like at Vermont Yankee, we have a record-breaking number of reactor shutdowns going on since 2013 in the United States. The race is on. These reactors are in the breakdown phase. We can see a Fukushima-scale disaster in this country because of a breakdown at an old atomic reactor. So these subsidies that are keeping them alive and the NRC rubber stamps that not only give them not 40 years of operations, but 60 years and even 80 years. There's even talk of 100 years of operations at atomic reactors. We are playing with fire. And so some of the other candidates, Elizabeth Warren has just come out and said that she adopts Jay Inslee, the governor of Washington's climate plan. The problem with that, Senator Warren, is that Jay Inslee is pro-nuclear, at least to a certain extent. In fact, he voted in favor of the Yucca dump. What's interesting in a Democratic primary for president is Nevada is now an early caucus state. Nevada is adamantly opposed for 32 years now to the Yucca Mountain dump, the national dump site on western Shoshone Indian land. That is not going to happen. There's too much resistance. So for Elizabeth Warren to embrace Jay Inslee's position is problematic because Jay Inslee voted for Yucca Mountain as a member of Congress back in 2002. So they've got to do their homework on these things, and I think Elizabeth Warren will pretty quickly realize she has to oppose the Yucca dump, and I think she does, in Nevada if she has any hope of winning that caucus. Barack Obama won the caucus in Nevada in 2008. It was important to his eventual election to the White House, and he turned around quickly in 2009 and canceled the Yucca dump. To his credit, he had other nuclear positions that were very problematic, but to Obama's credit, he canceled the Yucca dump. It was the right thing to do. We now have to defend that victory because Trump and Rick Perry and House Republicans especially are trying to revive the Yucca dump as we speak.
And as we tape this, the perceived frontrunner, Democratic frontrunner for President Biden, how does he stand on nuclear?
He has a very problematic history. I mentioned that Obama, and so Obama-Biden in the White House, they had a lot of bad positions on nuclear. You know, to give some more credit, the Obama administration offered a loan guarantee for a new reactor on the Chesapeake Bay in Maryland. It was called Calvert Cliffs Unit 3. But to their credit, Obama, Biden, and their Department of Energy said, well, if we're going to give you all this taxpayer money, essentially interest-free loans, then you're going to have to put some of your skin in the game, and they required an 11% credit subsidy fee. But 11% of that much money was still nearly $1 billion. And the American company said, no way. Constellation Energy said, we're done. We're not building this thing. Eventually, that project died because the American partner walked away. Unfortunately, they learned the wrong lesson. And the next nuclear loan guarantee, Vogtle Units 3 and 4 in Georgia, this is Obama, Biden, they offered $8.3 billion nuclear loan guarantee with zero credit subsidy fee. Free money from the taxpayers. Trump has come in and given another $3.7 billion, a total of $12 billion of taxpayer money wrapped up in Vogtle Units 3 and 4. Not if, but when that project defaults on its loan, when it goes belly up, that $12 billion will be lost to the U.S. Treasury. That's something like 23 times the amount of money that was lost in the Solyndra solar loan default that Republicans especially have tried to make so much hay about. Obama wasted $535 million of taxpayer money on this Solyndra solar thing. Vogtle 3 and 4 is $12 billion. That's just the taxpayer money. The ratepayer money that would be lost in Georgia is immense. We've already seen it in South Carolina, $9 billion lost to ratepayers. It led to the bankruptcy of Westinghouse Nuclear, almost led to the bankruptcy of Toshiba in Japan. Those are the kind of financial risks being taken, and it's why not one penny of company skin in the game is going on at Vogtle 3 and 4. Biden has to answer for some of that because it was the Obama-Biden administration. So he's kind of wishy-washy. He has nuclear R&D money. Haven't they gotten enough already since 1942 in this country? So Biden's not taking a strong stand on this issue.
In terms of the grassroots, and change, I think most of the time occurs in the grassroots, what can people do to stop this new Trump push for nuclear power? And if he is defeated, stopping some of these Democrats who are for nuclear power, what can people do?
Get to know your elected officials, get to know your candidates at every opportunity, ask them questions about these issues. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to express your views. And that's what puts pressure on presidential candidates, you know, in these early primary states of New Hampshire, Iowa, South Carolina, Nevada. Every one of those states I just mentioned has very serious nuclear power and radioactive waste issues going on. The transportation of the radioactive waste. Mustafa Ali, the former EPA environmental justice head, who now works for National Wildlife Federation, after this presidential town hall debate on the climate, made a really great point about this, spectrum of democratic views. He pointed out, he had some words of praise for Cory Booker, his environmental justice positions, but he said about Cory Booker, he has to look at the transportation of the radioactive waste to these proposed dump sites. Guess where it goes through? It goes through low-income people of color communities, and the dumps are targeted at those very same or similar low-income people of color communities. So Mustafa Ali said this is a huge environmental justice issue. Cory Booker has to do more homework, apparently so. I think a part of the explanation on Cory Booker is Holtec International is based in New Jersey. He's close to that company. They're a leading nuclear waste company. They also want to sell small modular reactors, and he is beholden to them, unfortunately. He has a lot to learn about the skeletons in this company's closet, including racism, actually. So what people can do is just get involved, join the anti-nuclear movement, check out Beyond Nuclear's website, check out the website of Nuclear Information and Resource Service. We are clearinghouses to the grassroots anti-nuclear movement in this country, which has succeeded in blocking most of the reactors that were ever proposed. They ended up building about 125 reactors in this country. 97 are still operating. They wanted to build 1,000. Richard Nixon wanted to build 1,000 reactors in this country. They were blocked, and the grassroots anti-nuclear movement in this country had something to do with that. We have to up our game because, as I said, the breakdown phase reactors, 97 of them, are all Fukushimas waiting to happen, waiting to have a bad day that takes out a region of our country, or worse. We have to shut them down. We have to block the new reactors, and we have. Under Bush-Cheney, a decade or 15 years ago, there were 36 new reactors proposed in this country. There are 2 still under construction. The rest are essentially canceled. What a victory. We never have time to celebrate our victories. The anti-nuclear movement, the environmental movement, the environmental justice movement played huge roles in blocking 34 Bush-Cheney proposed new reactors. We got to keep that up.
Kevin Kamps of the organization Beyond Nuclear, speaking on the Trump nuclear push. This has been Enviro Close-Up. I am Karl Grossman. Thanks for watching, and as Kevin and I suggest, get involved in the anti-nuclear movement.